Part I: The Deceitful Horizon. The ocean is the ultimate liar. It presents itself as an infinite expanse of blue, a limitless resource that covers 70% of our planet. But to the human body, the ocean is a desert more hostile than the Sahara. There is a cruel irony embedded in the physiology of man. We are creatures made of water, drifting on a rock covered in water, yet we possess no mechanism to consume it. To understand the pirate, you must first understand the terror of the void. You imagine battles with the Royal Navy or duels with cutlasses. But the true enemy of the Golden Age pirate was not a man. It was the chemistry of the sea itself. The salt content of the ocean sits at roughly 3.5%. Your kidneys, the biological filters that keep you alive, can only process a salinity of about 0.9%. When a desperate sailor drinks from the sea, he initiates a biological suicide pact. The body panics. It recognizes the toxic influx of salt and attempts to flush it out. But to do so, it must sacrifice its own internal reserves. Through the ruthless process of osmosis, water is stripped from your cells to dilute the salt in your stomach. You drink to quench your thirst, but you only accelerate your dehydration. It is a paradox that has driven men to madness for millennia. You are dying of thirst, while floating on the largest reservoir of liquid on Earth. The symptoms of this decline are not merely physical. They are psychological. As the brain shrinks from fluid loss, reality begins to fracture. Sailors would report seeing green fields and fresh springs on the horizon. They would hallucinate banquets and rivers, walking off the edge of the ship into the abyss to reach them. This was the daily reality of the 17th and 18th centuries. A ship was nothing more than a wooden confinement cell with limited resources. Space was the ultimate currency. A captain had to make a calculated gamble every time he left port. Do you load more water barrels and sacrifice speed and cargo space? Or do you load more guns and trade goods, praying that the wind holds? Most chose the latter. They were gamblers by trade, chasing the high of the plunder. But the ocean always collects its debt. Stories circulated through the taverns of Nassau and Port Royal like a contagion. Ghost ships found drifting in the Atlantic, untouched by cannon fire. The cargo was intact. The gold was still in the hold. But the crew was a collection of dried husks, dead from thirst in the middle of a blue wasteland. These were not fairy tales. They were operational warnings. The smartest captains, men like Blackbeard and Bartholomew Roberts, understood the hierarchy of survival. Gold was a luxury. Water was life. A mutiny could be suppressed with fear, but thirst could not be negotiated with. When the barrels ran dry, the social contract of the ship evaporated. Loyalty dissolved. Men who had fought back to back would turn on each other for a single cup of murky liquid. Part 2. The Architecture of Discipline. Survival required an evolution of the pirate intellect. These men were often uneducated, illiterate outcasts. Yet necessity forced them to become hydraulic engineers. They realized that waiting for salvation was a death sentence. They had to seize control of their environment, using the crude tools at their disposal. The first lesson was the exploitation of the sky. Rain was the only mercy the ocean offered, but catching it required military precision. When a storm broke, the ship transformed from a vessel of war into a collection machine. But there was a problem that only experience could teach. The sails, coated in weeks of dried salt spray and grime, were contaminated. If you simply funneled rain through a dirty sail, you created a brine as deadly as the sea itself. Discipline became the filter. Crews developed rigorous washing routines, scrubbing the canvas with precious fresh water before the storm hit. It was an investment. You spend water to make water. They rigged elaborate funnel systems using tarps, ropes, and gravity. Every angle was calculated to channel the deluge into the waiting barrels. But the rain is capricious. In the doldrums of the Caribbean, a ship could languish for weeks under a relentless sun with no cloud in sight. Here, the pirates turned to the subtle physics of condensation. They utilized sheep hides and thick woolen cloths, suspending them overnight to catch the dew. The temperature differential between the cooling air and the humid sea created moisture. In the morning, they would wring out the fabrics, collecting meager cups of fluid. It was an act of desperation, but also of defiance. They were stealing life from the air itself. The most successful crews mechanized this process. They established rotations and quotas. Water collection was not a chore, it was a divine duty. To slack on the collection line was to threaten the collective survival of the group. Punishment for wasting water was often more severe than for stealing gold. However, collection was only half the battle. The true nightmare lay in storage. We take the stability of water for granted. In the modern world, we seal it in sterile plastic or glass. The pirate had only oak. They stored their lifeline in massive wooden casks called butts, capable of holding over 120 gallons. But wood is organic. It breathes. It rots. Within days of leaving port, the biology of the barrel would awaken. Bacteria and algae thrived in the dark, damp interior of the casks. The water would turn green. Then it would turn black. It developed a slime layer that coated the tongue, and a smell reminiscent of rotten eggs and decay. This was not merely unpleasant, it was a biological hazard. Dysentery and cholera lurked in the slime. To drink it was to risk purging the very fluids you were trying to replenish. The flavor profile was a horror story of its own. Barrels were rarely new. They were recycled containers that had previously held salted meat, beer, rum, or gunpowder. The wood remembered everything it had touched. Water would take on the rancid notes of spoiled fat, or the harsh tang of chemicals. Imagine drinking a liquid that tastes of swamp scum and old leather, knowing it is the only thing keeping you alive. Part 3, the charcoal filter. It was in this crucible of rot that pirates stumbled upon a scientific breakthrough. They did not know what a microbe was. They had no concept of germ theory. But they had eyes, and they had fire. Some unknown genius, perhaps driven by the need to purge a particularly foul-smelling barrel, decided to burn the inside. This was the birth of the charring technique. Pirates would light controlled fires inside the empty oak staves. They let the flames lick the wood until the interior was coated in a layer of black carbon. They stopped the burn just before the structural integrity of the barrel failed. To the uneducated observer, this looked like destruction. In reality, it was advanced chemistry. The layer of charcoal created by the fire acted as an adsorption filter. Activated carbon has an incredibly high surface area. It traps impurities, organic compounds, and bacteria within its microscopic pores. It binds the toxins that cause rot and bad taste. By burning their barrels, pirates were inadvertently creating the world's first industrial water filtration system. The results were undeniable. Water stored in charred barrels remained clear for weeks, sometimes months. The carbon suppressed the algae blooms. It neutralized the foul tastes leached from the wood. The liquid remained sweet and potable long after untreated barrels had turned into toxic sludge. This is the same principle used in modern Brita filters and survival straws today. It is also the secret behind the production of bourbon and whiskey. Modern distillers char their barrels to filter the spirit and impart flavor. Pirates did it to cheat death. The technique spread across the fleets not through manuals, but through survival of the fittest. Ships that charred their barrels arrived at their destinations with healthy crews. Ships that did not arrived as floating tombs. Evolution selected for the chemists. Part 4, the silver standard. But charring was labor-intensive and required fuel, another scarce resource. The pirates needed a passive solution, something that could work without fire. This search led to the discovery of the oligodynamic effect, though they would never call it that. They called it the magic of the Spanish dollar. Silver has been valued as currency for thousands of years, but to the pirate captain, its value went beyond economics. They noticed a strange correlation. Water stored in silver vessels, or barrels where silver coins had been dropped, did not spoil. The shiny metal seemed to repel the green sickness that claimed so many supplies. This was not superstition. It was biology. Silver ions are toxic to bacteria, algae, and fungi. When submerged in water, the metal releases these ions, which pierce the cell walls of microorganisms. It destroys their DNA and prevents them from replicating. It is a natural antibiotic that functions on a molecular level. By tossing a handful of silver coins into a water butt, pirates were essentially sterilizing their supply. This revelation changed the way they viewed their plunder. A chest of silver coins was not just wealth to be squandered in Tortuga. It was a strategic asset. Smart captains would hoard silver specifically for their water supply. When the food ran out, when the rum was gone, the silver remained at the bottom of the barrel, silently fighting the microscopic war. The logistics were elegant in their simplicity. Unlike charcoal, which degraded over time, silver was permanent. When a barrel was empty, you simply retrieved your coins, rinsed them off, and tossed them into the next refill. It was a reusable life support system. There is a profound irony here. These men were criminals, hunted by every navy in the world for their theft of silver. Yet, that stolen silver was the very thing that allowed them to extend their range and continue their predation. The crews even claimed the water tasted better. The silver ions neutralized the sulfurous compounds that gave stagnant water its rotten smell. It was a luxury reserved for the foresightful. Those who spent their loot immediately on women and wine found themselves drinking slime. Those who held back their silver survived to raid another day. It is a testament to the Machiavellian truth that delayed gratification is a survival trait. Part V: the fire and the still. There were times, however, when preservation was not enough. When the voyage stretched too long, or the barrels were smashed in a storm, preservation became irrelevant. They needed production. They needed to turn the enemy, the ocean, into a friend. This forced them to master the art of distillation. The concept is simple: boil water, catch the steam, condense it back into liquid. The salt remains behind. But performing this operation on a wooden ship pitching in 20-foot swells is a nightmare of engineering. Fire is the natural predator of the wooden ship. One slip, one spilled coal, and the entire vessel becomes a bonfire in the middle of the ocean. Captain Bartholomew Roberts, a man known for his cold discipline, standardized this risk. He ordered the construction of distillation rigs utilizing the ship's copper cooking cauldrons. Copper was the material of choice. It conducted heat efficiently and resisted the corrosion of the salt air. More importantly, copper has antimicrobial properties similar to silver. It was a double layer of protection. The fuel cost was astronomical. To produce a few gallons of fresh water, you had to burn significant amounts of wood or coal. This created a ruthless economic calculus. Was the wood more valuable as spare planks for ship repairs, or as fuel for water? Desperate crews would burn furniture, bulkheads, and even spare masts. They were cannibalizing their own vessel to stay hydrated. The process was agonizingly slow. A jury-rigged still might produce a cup of water every 20 minutes. For a crew of 50 men, this was a drop in the bucket. It required 24-hour monitoring. Men would stand watch over the bubbling pots, guarding the steam as if it were the breath of God. The condensation was caught in woolen rags or metal plates, and funneled drop by drop into a clean container. But pirates were innovators of the highest order. They found ways to increase efficiency. They utilized the ship's cannons. Between battles, these massive iron tubes were useless dead weight. Clever engineers realized that the thermal mass of a cannon could be used as a heat exchanger or a condenser. By running pipes along the cool iron of the cannon, they could cool the steam faster, increasing the output of fresh water. In the northern latitudes, they adapted to the cold. They learned that sea ice acts as a natural salt separator. When seawater freezes, the crystal structure of the ice rejects the salt brine. Old sea ice is remarkably fresh. Pirates, operating in colder waters, would harvest floating ice. melting it down for a supply of water that was cleaner than anything they could pull from a well on land. They were exploiting the phase changes of matter to bypass the biological limits of the human body. Part VI, the desperate cocktails. When science failed, and the stills ran dry, pirates turned to chemistry of a different sort. They began to mask the rot. This is the origin of the pirates' reputation for drunkenness. It was not merely a love of debauchery, it was a medical necessity. Adding rum, wine, or brandy to water served two purposes. First, the alcohol acted as a preservative, raising the acidity and killing off a percentage of the bacteria. Second, and perhaps more importantly, it masked the taste of the slime. This mixture, often called grog, was the fuel of the British Navy and the pirate fleets alike. But pirates took it a step further. They added vinegar. The acetic acid in vinegar is a potent antimicrobial agent. It lowered the pH of the water, making it hostile to the pathogens that caused cholera and typhoid. The taste was vile, a sour, stinging concoction, but it kept the stomach cramps at bay. They became scavengers of botanicals. Citrus peels, herbs, and spices were not just for trade. They were water additives. The vitamin C in limes prevented scurvy, yes, but the citric acid also helped stabilize the water. They brewed pirate coffee, a dark slurry of roasted roots, chicory, and whatever distinct herbs they could forage from the islands. It was a primitive attempt at pharmacology. They were self-medicating their water supply, using trial and error to find anything that would suppress the nausea of drinking spoiled fluids. However, not all experiments ended in success. Ignorance often levied a heavy tax. Some crews attempted to use lead sheeting to line their water tanks, believing the heavy metal would seal the wood better. It worked. The tanks didn't leak, but the lead leached into the water supply, slowly poisoning the entire crew. The symptoms of lead poisoning: aggression, paranoia, confusion mimicked the effects of dehydration and cabin fever. It is likely that many mad pirate captains were simply victims of their own plumbing. They tried rudimentary filtration using sand and charcoal packed into old stockings. They strained water through loaves of stale bread, hoping the yeast and grain would catch the impurities. These were the acts of men staring into the abyss. They pushed the boundaries of what the human digestive system could tolerate. They were the guinea pigs in a grand, nautical experiment of survival. Part 7. The philosophy of thirst. In the end, the pirate's relationship with water reveals a fundamental truth about power. We look back at them as romantic figures, free men sailing the open seas. But they were slaves to their biology. Their freedom was tethered to the number of gallons in their hold. A captain could command a fleet. He could terrify an empire, but he could not command the rain to fall. This vulnerability created a unique societal structure. On a pirate ship, the quartermaster often held more power than the captain, because he controlled the distribution of supplies. Water equality was the bedrock of the pirate code. To each according to his need was not a political slogan. It was a survival strategy. If the lowest deckhand died of thirst, the ship lost a working pair of hands. If the navigator died, the ship was lost. Therefore, water was the great equalizer. The captain drank the same ration as the cabin boy. They mastered the environment because they had no other choice. They turned barrels into filters. They turned coins into medicine. They turned cannons into condensers. They were accidental scientists, stumbling upon principles of chemistry and physics that formal academia would not fully understand for another century. The modern world has solved the water problem with infrastructure. We turn a tap, and it flows. We have forgotten the terror of the dry barrel. But the pirate remembers. He reminds us that civilization is a thin veneer over our biological needs. Strip away the pipes, the plants, and the plastic bottles, and we are all just 1 week away from madness. The pirate looked at the ocean and saw death. But through intellect, ruthlessness, and a refusal to accept his fate, he forced the water to yield. He didn't just survive the sea, he outsmarted it. And in that victory, he found a treasure far more valuable than the gold in his chest. He found another day of life. Part 8 Conclusion. Consider this the next time you pour a glass of clear, tasteless liquid. You are drinking the end result of thousands of years of suffering. You are consuming the resource that built empires and destroyed fleets. The pirate teaches us that resourcefulness is the ultimate wealth. When the world offers you salt, you must build the still. When the barrel rots, you must bring the fire. The world is vast, indifferent, and often toxic. It does not care if you survive. Survival is an act of rebellion. It is an act of engineering. And sometimes it requires burning the very vessel that keeps you afloat, just to filter out the poison. Stay thirsty, but never drink the seawater.